And I have to admit, I don't fully understand everything, but it's...
There seems to be a lot you don't understand, Allan. Welcome back to Real Life Struggles, everyone, and today we're joined by Dr. Biddle and Allan Parr. In today's video, they continue to talk about the flood and what they think are proofs that it actually happened. And today we're talking about the breakup of the continents. Let's see what they have to say.
Another evidence that I found very interesting, and I have to admit, I don't fully understand everything, but it's the idea of Pangea, I believe it is, and the idea that at one point the Earth was just one big continent. The idea that a flood happened and broke up this world of one continent into different parts.
Yes, at one point, all of the continents were together in a supercontinent called Pangea. This comes from two words. One, pan, meaning all together. And two, Gaia. You might have heard that one. It means Mother Earth. There's a few problems with this theory. The first one being the age. Pangea broke up around 200 million years ago, not 6,000. The next problem is it's not the only one there ever was. It's actually one of 6. Pangea formed about 335 million years ago, when the existing continents at the time drifted back together. The last is the accelerated movement of the tectonic plates. Science said that this took millions of years because the plates only move a few inches per year. Young Earth creationism says it all happened in the year of Noah's flood. At best, it boils off the world's oceans. At worst, it's the energy equivalent of 180 trillion 1 megaton bombs all exploding at the same time. Surviving the rain would be the least of your worries when the earth has melted away.
Yeah, sure. We know that both from scripture where God says, let the dry land appear. So we do believe that there's a scriptural case to be made for a one continent situation.
If we're going to believe that ancient creation myths are actual history, then shouldn't we also believe that the earth is flat? The ancient Near Eastern cultures envisioned a 3-tier universe with a big dome covering the earth. Like I said before, most young earth creationists interpret that to be that there was a vapor canopy that surrounded and covered the earth, despite the scientific impossibility of that actually happening.
But we also know from geology and geophysics that there was in fact a single continent. Some people call it Rodinia or a Pangea-like formation.
Rodinia lasted from about 1.3 billion years ago to 750 million years ago. It's a completely different supercontinent. How can you know so much, but still know so little? This is what happens when you dismiss 90% of science and then make up 50% of what you believe. Let's skip the explanation. We know that the continents were probably once together because they fit together like a puzzle.
The amazing thing is, if you plot out the fossils and you look at the oil deposits where these continents used to be matching back perfectly together, they're correlated.
Billions of years will do that. Continents are formed, the continents split apart, and where they split apart, the fossils are probably going to be the same. How does any of this prove a flood? How do you explain the Australian animals being found in only Australia, without any fossils leading from Mesopotamia to Australia? When we study the actual fossil record, it looks like they started in North America, made it through South America, and then to Australia over land bridges. What happened? Did they take a boat the whole way and then jumped out onto dry land?
So we now can confirm they were rapidly spread apart.
You confirm things how? You combine two different supercontinents into one, despite the fact that they were separated by hundreds of millions of years? How about this? When you, man of limited scientific knowledge, can solve the unsolvable heat problem, then maybe you can start making claims. This heat problem is so bad that even young Earth creationists who do understand quite a lot of science have declared it to be unsolvable. The best that they can claim is that it happened by magic.
When the Bible says in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, that all the fountains on the same day broke apart. And so we have this underwater rifting, this oceanic rifting, which is a 40,000 mile circuit.
To cover the mountains on Earth would take over 813 million cubic miles of water. That's 250% more water than we currently have on Earth. If you want to say that a vapor canopy surrounded the Earth, and that's where all the water came from, then we have another heat problem. You see, when water changes from liquid to vapor, it releases heat, which would have cooked the Earth. And this is before the other heat just melts the Earth. If you think that it was a solid ice dome, then we have the other problem. It soaks up heat, and Earth turns into a frozen wasteland. It's kind of hard to flood the Earth with ice.
That goes around the Earth 1.6 times, where they have these underwater rift zones that are pushing these continents apart.
Yes, pushing them apart a few inches a year, not a few feet per hour. In fact, given enough time, and the continents are just going to form another supercontinent. Interestingly enough, just read there's some cracks in Africa that might lead to that splitting apart in a few million years.
Breaking out, as the Hebrew says, use the word bakah, which means to cleave. God cleaved the underwater seafloors apart, and that action started pushing the continents apart rapidly during the year-long flood.
And what did God do to dissipate the heat enough for all of this to happen? Something that we can, study and discover. Something that even a non-believer would be able to discover and study and lead himself to the conclusion that the Earth was once flooded globally.
So the Bible talks about, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there were two sources of water that contributed to the flood. Water erupting from the fountains of the earth. I'm assuming that's like volcanic eruption. And then there was the Bible talks about the heavens being opened, and so rainfall coming down from above. So
yes, this is generally what the story says.
That's very correct. In fact, the Bible is such a diary and such a historical record that God even says how long each of those two water sources lasted. He had just
later in the Bible, it functions more as a historical record. Like, for example, 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. This part of the Bible was most likely recorded from oral tradition that was passed down for perhaps hundreds of years.
For 150 days, the fountains went, and then God shut them off. And the torrential rain lasted for 40 days. When God says that he undid the tapestry of heaven was pulled apart, and the water just fell out of heaven.
It's funny that these people can read verses and stories with so much poetic language, but still believe it's completely historical, despite what studying the culture will tell you. I will say it one more time. Even if God did just magic away the heat problem, why would he design and cause a global flood that left zero evidence that it actually happened? Wouldn't God want us to discover it just like we've discovered other planets? Especially if believing in the global flood is so important to the gospel as the young earth creationists preach it is.
But we also believe that when the fountains of the great deep were broken open, we have magma coming up that's bursting through these new seams. It's creating what's called supercritically heated steam jets critically heated water up into the atmosphere that is also falling back down as rain.
So super hot water is traveling up to meet the super hot water that's coming down, and somehow this didn't just destroy everything before the flood even happened, or boil all the water off the planet. It somehow didn't just flash kill every living creature on Earth at the same time. It allowed the animals to run away to create the young Earth creationist themed fossil record. It will be fun to hear him make more crazy claims as the video goes on.
Wow. Okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this.
With your previous track record, the odds are not in your favor, man.
I think I remember something about this in the film where fountain springs of the earth, are there really any sort of volcanic springs or any way for water to erupt from the ocean floor?
With the Earth as it is currently, even if all of the polar ice caps melted, it would only raise ocean levels about 220 feet. That's not even enough to flood all of Florida. There's zero evidence from either science or the Bible that would lead one to conclude that there were no significant mountains in pre-flood times. I have read some articles about there possibly being some underground oceans, but it does seem even with that amount of water, it's still only going to raise levels by a few feet at the most. Dr. Biddle now talks a lot about 1950 submarines discovering the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. He then claims this is a result of a catastrophic flood, when in reality, it's the result of two tectonic plates slowly pushing against each other over millions of years.
And it actually has mountain slopes leading up to it where the fountains of the Great Deep did break open. It's a huge mountain range that got pushed up like this.
Remember, movement causes friction. Friction causes heat, and excessive heat destroys things. If it did happen in less than a year, as he wants to claim, it would have boiled off the oceans.
And it created new seafloor that spread on each side, pushing the continents apart.
The process you described is factually correct, which is about the only thing you've gotten factually correct.
A couple things that people may have wondered or questions that they've asked would be, one question would be, how could Noah fit two of every kind of animal in the ark? I mean,
I've only heard one person give a coherent definition of what a kind is. And he wasn't even a young Earth creationist. He was somebody talking about the young Earth creationist beliefs. So first, you try giving a coherent definition of what a kind is. And to answer your question, you probably couldn't. Answers in Genesis believes that God used super evolution to create all of the animals we have now from just a few breeding pairs on the ark. One article says there were probably about 6,000 animals, and one article says 16,000. Even if they were all babies, where did all the food go? How did the carnivores eat? Did Noah spend a few years hunting and preserving meat so that he could feed them afterwards? All magically became herbivores. Another problem is animal waste. Where did it all go? How did they deal with it? Animal waste creates methane, and methane is poisonous. Yes, it's a big boat, but the logistics of caring for so many animals with so few people is mind-boggling. Even answers in Genesis with modern building techniques, modern materials, and a whole lot more people than 8 people couldn't build an ark in the amount of time that Noah supposedly did.
Isn't there 18 million species? There wouldn't be enough space on that ark in order for Noah to fit every single type of species. I mean, how is it feasibly possible for him to have fit all the different species on the earth?
Well, I would assume at the time these stories were being told, there probably weren't too many animals to consider. Certainly not every animal that's currently on Earth. Dinosaurs and other animals from that time would have been long gone. I'm just assuming, but there probably weren't too many polar bears or kangaroos hanging around that area. So as these stories are being developed, it would be pretty easy to fit all of the animals that were actually in that area on the boat.
We get that a lot, and it's so easily answered when you just push on it just a little bit. So let's just take dogs as an example.
Let's pick an animal that was domesticated 10,000 years before the story happened and are the product of a beneficial mutation. Whatever he says, it's probably going to be wild.
Dogs right now are all interfertile.
Cool story. How does it prove the flood? Species and families are a man-made thing. They're also not a hard border. It's more of a guide.
It's amazing. Of the dog kind, the dog family, you can take a basset hound and breed it with a golden retriever. You can make all kinds of different varieties, but you can't take anything in the dog kind and breed it with something that's outside of that dog family. You can't breed them with raccoons or cats or anything else.
Well, now you're using words in a way they're not meant to be used. Dogs are of the species Canis lupus familiaris, or a familiar wolf. They're also thought of as perhaps just a subspecies of Canis lupus, the wolf. Dogs and wolves can still interbreed. The family name is Canidae. Of course they can't breed with something genetically incompatible, just like you can't breed a spider with a snake.
So the original dog kind was probably something that looked like a wolf or Canis lupus.
Anyone with 5 minutes to spare in Google can find out where dogs came from. Around 10,000 years ago, a wolf had a genetic mutation that allowed it to eat starchy foods. This meant it could hang out with humans and eat their food. It survived and reproduced, and its offsprings continued to hang out with humans and eat their starchy foods. Over thousands of years, humans would pick these wolf dogs that had the best traits, and then they would breed them, and time went on until we now have a wide range of dogs.
It's the same thing with the bear family. It's called the Ursidae family and the biological bear family. Well, did you know that?
So now you used the words correctly. Why couldn't you do this when you talked about dogs? Well, he now goes on this long rant about bears and breeding bears, and honestly, I don't care. So we're going to skip it.
When you start mapping back all the different species and breeds to their original kind, you quickly can reduce the number of animals just to about 7,000 total animals that had to be on board the Ark.
Well, kinds have no scientific definition, and they probably never will. Every animal that you're talking about was around long before the story of Noah's Ark took place. Are you claiming that dogs were never around before Noah's flood? Or they were, and people just happened to re-domesticate a wolf just for fun? It seems a bit of a stretch to say that cats never existed before the flood. They're just a result of super hyper evolution after the flood,
making it perfectly feasible for a boat that was 500 and some feet long.
Except for the multiple problems I brought up and all of the assumptions you have to make in order for it to work.
From my understanding is that the way God created these animals is that there's many, many different types of genetic mutations possible within, let's just say, two dogs, which would allow two dogs to mate and then create over time more and more different types of dogs. The dog kind, there's many, many different possible genetic mutations.
Except it was a very specific mutation that happened that allowed wolves to eat human food that led to the domestication of dogs. Saying that God created a wolf with a lot of genetic potential doesn't work because there is zero evidence of this mutation existing before this event happened. You want to say God caused this event to happen 10,000 years ago? That's fine with me.
It gets even more amazing than what you just said. Scientists are now discovering that there is this thing called continuous environmental tracking. Dogs and all other animal kinds actually have programmed in their genes the ability to read their environmental conditions and pass down different expressions of those protein coding genes to the next generation.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't this just natural selection? Dogs with a mutation and ability that allows them to live longer and reproduce more are going to take over. I'm not against God tinkering with evolution. I'm sure a non-believing evolutionary biologist could explain this much better.
So you can see a wolf up in Alaska. It's going to be thick and husky, and it's going to have lots of fur. Then you can go to Africa and look at the wolf there. Looks different. Shorter hair, skinnier, but they can still interbreed. They're still interfertile.
Yes, selection pressure allows animals to adapt to their environment. I'm pretty sure even the most adamant anti-evolution young earth creationists would agree with this. Well, everyone, we have finished point number 6. There's only one more to go, and we will look at it in the next video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking through to the end. I really appreciate all of my supporters. Please hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends. I've got plenty of other videos on my channel, so please hang out. They're investigating the flood. Yes, at one point the continents were all together in a super. Pangea broke up about, like I said before, most Rodina was around from about. Well, now you're using words